And we are live. Hello everyone. Sorry I'm late. I left the office a bit later than usual, so that moved everything. Let me put the headphones on, up, and then I'm all yours. Alright, welcome. I hope that you had a nice beginning of the week. Like I said, sorry for the delay. I left the office late, so yeah, that moved everything a bit around. Let me get my bearings. I was looking for something specific. I forgot what I was looking for, so it's probably not important. Alright, so on the menu today, news review as it is usual. Today we're going to talk about trade for change, but not Mercosur. Progress. Today we're talking about the brand new EU-India trade deal. We'll discuss what's in it, what's not in it, why this deal was even made up in the first place, etc., etc. So we'll discuss that. Then we'll discuss the other, let's say, drama of the day in the EU bubble, which is Rutte's, so the Secretary General of NATO. Mark Rutte's declaration in the European Parliament, where he trolled MEPs by saying, yeah, well, forget about your dreams of EU defense, it's the US or nothing. So, of course, he created a lot of debates. France was not happy for a change, so we'll discuss about that. And to finish, we'll read an article that is relatively interesting on how the EU is taking inspiration from China to try to boost its or relaunch its industry, its industrial policy. So that's the few topics that I have on the menu for today. As usual. Sorry. As usual, you have 10 fingers. If there are other topics you want to discuss, you let me know. You have a chat. Also, for people on Twitter, if you want to participate to the chat, you have a link to go on Twitch. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And also, I saw something in the chat. I see Vincent in the chat. Vincent, I need to give you credit because Vincent, you will meet him on the channel eventually. He's a friend of mine who wrote a book. I'm reading his book, and thanks to his book, I learned something that I didn't know about the Mickey Mouse. So Mickey Mouse is the name of a bar inside the European Parliament. It's like the go-to place if you have to meet someone to gossip and everything. And something I learned in his book that I didn't know is that actually this allegedly one of the urban legends around the creation of that bar is that the Mickey Mouse was named like this in reference to Margaret Thatcher. Why? Because Thatcher, so a former British Prime Minister, she has said, it's true, she has compared the European Parliament to a Mickey Mouse Parliament, because back then the Parliament was not very powerful, and so apparently one of the theory around the creation of the Mickey Mouse Bar in the European Parliament is that it was created as a reference and a bit of a mockery to Margaret Thatcher's remarks on the Parliament being a Mickey Mouse Parliament, and so now the Parliament has a Mickey Mouse bar, which I found rather funny. I never heard that theory, and I looked it up a bit online, and apparently it's a story that goes around quite a bit, so credit to him for teaching me that. But yeah. Yeah, there's many interpretations. Like I posted it on Twitter, and like people are like, yeah, but no, it's about the chairs, it's about the painting, etc. There's plenty stories around the creation of the Mickey Mouse, but I like the Margaret Thatcher's one. I have to say I like it, and it makes sense, let's say. Or maybe it's the French in me that's speaking, saying, oh yeah, something to stick it up to the Brits. So I'm all in, etc. So that might be also a bit of bias on my part, but yeah. Anyway, I was just saying that because I saw Vincent in the chat. Alright, so back on track. Let me just check something because I have a notification on the side. It's fine, nothing important, I can go. Alright, so let's dive right in because it's a pretty busy agenda for today. The new kid on the block is the EU-India trade deal that was announced actually today. Yeah, what was it? Yeah, today it was von der Leyen was in India along with Sefcovic in Costa, so the VIPs of the Commission and the Council. She was in India for the National Day of India and to finalize the trade deal that has been a long time in preparation, as all trade deals are not negotiated in a snap of a finger. It's something that takes years and years. This one took 10 years, Mercosur took 25, but nonetheless, something that was pretty impressive to see this deal being concluded so fast, especially since last year there was a political commitment from the Commission and India to finalize that trade deal by the end of 2025. So that didn't happen, but end of January, close enough. And I'm saying it's a bit surprising because India is notoriously a complicated trade partner. It's very protectionist. There's plenty of sources of difficulties, source of tensions between the EU and India, and the fact that they overcame all, or at least parts of these difficulties, to finalize a trade agreement is pretty significant, pretty interesting, and as we'll see, there's political reasons behind that, and both sides had to make compromises with their own red lines, whether the EU on agriculture, or India on CBAM, so on steel and everything. So we will read about this. So, and that's feeding also the renewed trade agenda of the EU, who is pursuing alternatives to the US for the past year to, of course, reduce the possible threat or the consequences of threats from, I was going to say Putin, no, from Trump on transatlantic trade and a market of 1 point something billion people. Not a bad way to create a potential new market for European companies, especially since India, as I said, is a historically a very protectionist country. It's very hard to access the Indian market, and so the reduction in tariff and everything might provide an interesting new playground for European companies. So, sorry, I don't know why, I know I have this cough. Get used to it. I'm gonna have this cough for a while. Every time I get sick, I get the cough for a month or something. So get used to it. So can't find the article anymore, but I think that one problem was that India wanted to protect their own farmers against imports and had to choke. Yeah, there's a bit of that. You're right, because India, so agriculture is very important for India, but they're very protectionist on this. Because basically a good chunk of their population live of agriculture and small scale agriculture, and so there is very high concerns that if the EU, for instance, who is a big power in terms of agriculture, despite all the protests from farmers, we're not a small power when it comes to agriculture. If the EU and its agriculture industry was allowed to have free access to the Indian market, it would basically wreak havoc in the current agricultural system of India. Hence, why India is very reluctant was very reluctant on allowing on opening too wide the gates on agriculture. On the other end, there are some area of agriculture also European farmers are not so keen on seeing that. So on both sides, there are parts of the agriculture where it was put aside because people acknowledge that it was complicated politically, and even you reading between the lines. It seems pretty clear that the trade deal was kind of rushed towards the end because there are some parts of the trade agreement, for instance, on GPI, so geographically protected indication, so one of the key feature of any EU trade deal, so the protection of all the protected appellations like Roquefort, Champagne, Parmigiano, etc., etc. It's always a big offensive interest of the EU in trade agreements, and this list has not been agreed yet. Basically, the deal say, okay, we're gonna have something a bit later on GIs, but for now it's not in the current deal. So I guess there was a push to get that through because von der Leyen was in India and everything, so they wanted to get a win, to get a win through the door, especially since Europe will want to shake off the disappointment of the Mercosur, the Mercosur, the trade agreement with Mercosur that was postponed because of the Parliament judicial review. So I guess that there are some things that will say, okay, we'll deal with that later or in another deal. So, but you're right that on agriculture, India was relatively protective. Okay, so EU-India trade pact is a boost for Europe's car and spirits. The Commission says the deal is the most ambitious trade opening that India has ever granted to a trade partner. The EU and India sealed the landmark trade pact in New Delhi on Tuesday after almost 2 decades of negotiation. Oh, 12 years. Okay, I thought it was 10. My bad then. After almost 2 decades of negotiation, slashing FT tariff on key European exports such as cars, machinery, wine, and spirits. Amid a turbulent year for global trade and with Brussels keen to diversify its trade partners, the bloc has secured an agreement with the world's most populous country, home to 1.45 billion people and one of the fastest growing major economies, with a GDP of 3.5 trillion euro. In what the European Commission chief Ursula von der Leyen has dubbed the mother of all deals, Brussels has persuaded one of the world's most protectionist economies to lower duties on many products. But behind the catchy mottos, EU officials admit that Brussels has settled for less than it wanted, agreeing to some modest outcome in certain areas. So, like I said, you wanted something out, so you put aside some issues on both sides, because otherwise it would have been stuck for still a long time. Direct effect of the new agreement will likely be very small in the first few years. For Germany and Austria, only additional GDP growth of up to 0.1% is assumed. Sure, it's better than nothing, but that won't solve our structural problem of the European economy. I mean, in general, like the same way that discourses saying that our trade deals are going to be an apocalypse for the EU economy, which is bullshit, it's equally bullshit when you're told, oh, yeah, trade agreement will bring prosperity like never before to Europe. Like if you go into pure contribution of GDP growth on a per year basis, trade agreements are usually not that big of a deal. Like it's not something that brings on its own like 2% GDP, because companies are not suddenly going to rush to the Indian market. Indian market is not going to rush to the European market, etc. It's just that incremental progresses. And also the value of a trade deal is also strategic, political cooperation, etc., etc. So in terms of like pure economic direct benefit to GDP, yeah, like don't expect that deal or any other deal to bring an insane amount of growth. Is then, if you take cumulatively the effects of all the trade deals that the EU is making, then it's starting to add up, especially since the EU tends to have an economy that is based on exportation, especially for certain countries like Germany, for instance. That being said, it will be interesting to see, like, given that it's a 1.5 almost a billion people market, it'd be interesting to see if there is a appetite for European product that gets developed in India, and then whether it will become like a big market for a certain part of the certain European sectors. Where was I? So yeah, the Brussels settled for less than it wanted, which again makes sense because India is a very complicated trade partner and you wanted a win. Given that India is unique, this agreement is also going to be different from all agreements the EU has concluded before, said a senior EU official briefing journalists on Tuesday morning. The shortcomings are most notable in energy and raw materials, which are largely absent from the agreement, as well as in government procurement, which has no dedicated chapter, which indeed government procurement, so the ability of European companies to participate to public contracts. So when the government is issuing a contract, companies compete. In many countries, that's not the case in the EU, in many countries, they reserve that market for national company, or they give very big advantages for national companies. And so in trade deals, traditionally, the EU gets the other country to drop a significant part, or if not all, the restrictions on accessing these public contracts. That's one of the typical demands of the EU in trade agreements, and so that has been dropped as well because you wanted a deal. India is notoriously protectionist, so you take what you want, otherwise you would be negotiating for an extra 10 years. When it comes to goods, many agricultural products were also excluded from the negotiations due to EU sensitivities, including beef, rice, and sugar. Here you get the PTSD from Mercosur. If you want the deal to, it's farmers. You know, farmers will always find a way to burn stuff up and protest. You can count on them. But if you can avoid some key triggers, for instance, on beef, on rice, and sugar, that can make the thing more palatable. Or maybe not for farmers, because farmers are never happy. That's the principle of farmers. But for governments, because they'll be able to say, oh yeah, many things were protected for farmers, so I can take the political risk of supporting that deal because some of the most sensitive things that triggered everyone on Mercosur are absent there. So you can make the comparison, say, oh look, all the things you ate in Mercosur, they are not there in India, in the Indian deal, so we can go ahead. In turn, India will not accept imports of dairy products, reflecting efforts to protect its own industry. In terms of content, obviously, it is not the most ambitious trade agreement ever, the official said. In addition, the trade and sustainability chapter are significantly watered down compared with earlier EU deals. The Paris Agreement notably does not feature as an essential element of the deal, meaning the trade pact cannot be suspended if India decides to withdraw from the convention. Farmers are never... when have you seen a farmer happy? Like, when was the last time you saw a happy farmer? I'm sorry, that goes with the job description. Like, wakes up early, pissed off, as a tractor. That's a farmer. I'm sorry. I can't do. That's my best deal. That's my best offer. That's my best offer. I'm sorry. So yeah, the Paris Agreement can be dropped by India without consequences, which in previous deal, notably Mercosur, the EU had managed to get there. So it's also interesting to see also the different kind of partner, because India being extremely protectionist, the mere principle of having a trade agreement is a big deal. India is a big market. They are definitely not so keen on anything environment friendly, etc., etc. So they're clearly, again, the EU prioritize, okay, we're putting the foot in the door to get access to 1.5 billion people market. And so we have to let go a number of things because the foot in the door is more important than the traditional stuff we would ask from other partners, the category of partners that India is not. Forcing India to remain a party to the Paris Agreement was a step too far. They saw it as an encroachment to their sovereignty, the official added. Nicolas Kohler-Suzuki, advisor for trade and economic security at the Jacques Delors Foundation, says this could set a precedent for future free trade deals by moving away from the previous sustainability template. Politically, however, it is certainly something that will be difficult in the ratification process, he added, pointing to the European Parliament as a potential hurdle. Indeed, it will be hard to sell, for instance, on the social part of the socialist, if there is no binding commitments on the Paris Agreement. That's for sure. You talked about the name protection not being done. Is the French lobby for these producers so weak? I would assume this producer would also support Mercosur because at the moment they don't have this protection, but I earn nothing. I mean, that's... Oh, I'm not in the secrets of FNSEA and all these organizations, but I guess like it's always an internal balance. Like the producers, the agricultural producer of GIs are very specific. They are very protected by nature of producing GIs. And so indeed, when you have a trade agreement, they tend to be potential winners because it opens markets to for them, and they don't have competition because the competition can't call their product champagne, Roquefort, etc., etc. So they are relatively protected. But then internally within the ecosystem of agriculture, I guess that they make a deal, kind of make a deal with the other farmers, saying, okay, we shut up, we don't say anything against the deal, but we don't say anything in favor of the deal because other parts of agriculture are in favor of it. It's like for the wine producers, alcohol producers, they tend to be pretty much in favor of trade agreements because they are big exporters, but you don't hear them much. They shut up because they let other parts of the agriculture sectors who are very much opposed to it to take the floor. So it's kind of internal balance within organizations. So it's not necessarily a question of them being weak. It's more that probably it's internal sectorial discussions. And also, like, you don't necessarily... I mean, they must be lobbying, like, they must be in contact with the trader. Also, the GIs, they probably are involved earlier in the negotiations with the commission, because since during the negotiation, you need to... I'm talking in most agreements, not in the case of India. Although in the case of India, probably the negotiation is still ongoing. Like, the GI producers and the Ministry of Trade... there'll be in discussion with the EU to try to push what would end up in the list. So their lobbying takes place earlier because they know already that the EU is going to push for recognition of GIs. Like, that's one of the typical thing that the EU asks for any trade agreement is recognition of parts of their GIs. And so, depending on your penetration on the market, your interest, etc., you're going to push in there. And so you kind of already taken care of, in a sense. And so it's not really a threat for you. Because even if the trade agreement does not happen, still doesn't, like, even if, like, for instance, let's take India. Even if the part on GIs is not finalized, like, Indian products can't come on the EU market and call themselves Roquefort, because GI protection applies in the EU regardless of the trade agreement and the mutual recognition of GI. So it's neutral. Like, if the trade agreement is not finalized or not signed, it's kind of neutral for them. It's only an offensive kind of interest. If they want to go conquer the Indian market, there they need the deal. But if they're not interested in the Indian market, they don't sell to the Indian market, etc., they don't really give a shit. They're not impacted. Where was I? Parliament is going to be a better. Oh, okay. Yeah. So India had also been pushing for an exemption from the EU carbon border tax, CBAM, and to ensure that other nations would not receive better treatment than New Delhi. That was the big request of the Indians. India is a big producer of steel, and they were not pleased with the EU carbon border tax, the CBAM mechanism, which enters into force this year, and basically is the EU taxing steel and other products entering the EU based on whether or not they have, let's say, carbon reduction mechanism in place or not, like the EU or not. So typically, India does not have the same standards in terms of carbon reduction, and so to avoid the risk of EU rules being circumvented through Indian exports, when you have Indian steel coming in the European market, they would be taxed kind of to the level of as if they were produced in the EU, which of course India does not like at all and wanted an exemption. On this, I don't know if that was. I didn't see yet if there was anything there. And so the commission on its side did refuse. Like the commission said, yeah, we have these rules. They are not trade. They are not trade mechanism. They are environment mechanism. So there's no exemption. Like we can't say, oh, for you that doesn't apply. So there's kind of a back and forth kind of thing on CBAM. So the EU has ruled out exemption for individual countries and instead proposed technical dialogue to support the CBAM transition, along with a clear commitment not to treat the US better than India. Okay, so there, India had to put water in its wine to water down its ambitions. They don't get the exemption. The Commission says, okay, we're going to help you out to adapt to the system and potentially reduce your emission. We promise that the US, who also wants exemption from CBAM, is not going to get a better deal than you. And that's it. But there, okay, the Indians had to give up on CBAM, like the Europeans had to give up on public procurement. I was going to say GI. GI is just postponed, but and on the Paris Agreement. Okay, so reduction in tariff on goods are the big win of this trade agreement. Which, again, to be fair, given that India is extremely protectionist, it's a big win. We're talking about on many products, it was 100+% tariff level on many goods. So reduction in tariff, kind of already of an interesting win for the EU industries. Where was I? There. We expect the agreement to open markets that have been currently closed behind high level of protection, said the senior official. Crucially, the agreement slashes tariff on European cars, cutting them from 110% to as low as 10% within a quota of 250,000 vehicles. Although this falls short of full liberalization, so 0% tariff, the car concessions are significant as the EU exports only about 3,000 cars per year to India due to the current prohibitive tariff, the official said. So you have a margin of progression that is pretty important, especially given that it's a market of 1.5 billion people. Like you divide by more than 10 the level of tariff, which is significant. India recently overtook Japan to become the world's fourth largest car market behind the US, China, and the EU, with more than 5 million vehicles sold in 2023 alone. Tariffs on car parts will be reduced to zero over the next 5 to 10 years. Kohler Suzuki said the key question is whether such quantities will be renegotiated in a few years given expected market growth, which usually quotas are renegotiated when there is a need. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens during an update of trade deals, which happens on a semi-regular basis. For now, we can safely say that this is meaningful. 250,000 cars is not nothing, especially if your baseline is 3,000. Here they compare it to the 37,000 quota obtained by the UK. On steel, negotiations went in the opposite direction as the EU sought to limit imports from India, a major global producer. Negotiators settled on duty-free quota of 1.6 million tons, about half of current Indian exports to the bloc. Tariff of up to 44% on machinery, the EU's main export to India, 22% on chemicals and 11% on pharmaceutical, will mostly be eliminated within a decade, the Commission said. On the food front, while most sensitive agricultural products on both sides are exempt, there have been significant wins on tariff reduction for EU wine and spirits, a market currently closed with tariffs set at 150%. Tariff on wine will fall from 150% to 75%, so divided by 2, when the deal enters into force, before being phased down to 20% over several years, while duties on spirits will be lowered to 40%. This agreement is a real game changer for our sector, said Spirit Europe Director General Mark Titterington. Olive oil manufacturers are expected to be among the biggest winners, with tariff falling from 45% to 0 within 5 years. Alright, so each side drops some of their key requests. You still add on pure tariff quite a good reduction on both sides. So there's still an economic win for a bunch of sectors. But why is suddenly a negotiation between two economic spaces that are notoriously difficult in their respective negotiation suddenly got done within a year? And putting aside some of things that were very important for each side. Oh shit, I'm kicking out my tea. And the response is of course political. So EU and India close ranks against Trump and Xi to seal a trade deal. American tariff coercion and China's export dominance push Brussels and New Delhi to wrap up an elusive accord. It's cute, like. Also, Costa is of Indian descent, so he said that it was important for him also on a personal level to see this deal being done, etc., etc. So the EU and India talked on and off for nearly 20 years about doing a trade deal, but it took Donald Trump's tariff coercion and China's export dominance to push them into finally achieving a breakthrough. Brussels and New Delhi celebrated a landmark accord Tuesday to open markets spanning 2 billion people and accounting for more than a fifth of the global GDP, with Europe gaining greater access for its autos and alcohol, and India winning concessions on pharmaceuticals and services. Friends, today India has concluded the largest ever free trade agreement in its history, said Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a day after hosting EU leaders for the annual Republic Day parade in New Delhi, a first for the 27-nation bloc, ahead of a trade and defense summit. There comes a time when history tells us this was a turning point. This is when the moment took a new direction, when a new era began, Modi told reporters, standing alongside European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa. Von der Leyen reciprocated. This is a tale of two giants, he said. Two giants who choose partnerships in a true win-win fashion. A strong message that cooperation is the best answer to global challenges. The agreement, which marks the culmination of nearly a year of intensive talks, represents a significant geopolitical win for von der Leyen. It comes after a trade agenda suffered a heavy hit last week when the European Parliament stalled the ratification of a long-sought pact with the Latin America Mercosur bloc. So, of course, you want to clean that slide pretty fast, especially since you want to be able to tell other countries around the world, we open to business, like don't mind the Mercosur thing, we'll find a solution. Look, we signed a deal with India. I think they finished the negotiation with Indonesia. They're apparently negotiating things with Australia. So, like the EU is currently pushing a heavy trade agenda, which had been put in the freezer during the last mandate because of Trump. The Mercosur deal has faced intense opposition from farmers in countries such as France and Poland. The accord with India strikes a different balance, with both sides preferring to take small steps on agriculture while developing opportunities in key sectors like the automotive industry. India, known for its protectionist leanings and skilled negotiators, posed a tough nut to crack for the Commission's team. Preferring to more or less hit a year-end deadline set by von der Leyen and Modi in New Delhi last February, the two sides dialed back their ambitions to take the deal that was within reach. The EU has had to settle for less than what it was hoping to obtain, and so we've agreed to some modest outcome in certain areas. However, we've been careful to do that in a reciprocal manner, said the EU official, briefing on condition of anonymity. So we lost some, but the Indians also lost some. So in the end, it's kind of balanced. After ties between India and the US hit a low point at last August, when Trump imposed a 50% tariff on its export, the imperative to get a deal done overcame the inhibition that had lingered for so long. The two sides had been in on-off talks since 2007. Both know that they need each other like never before, and in this fractured world, where trusted partnerships are very, very hard to come by, said Garima Mohan, a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund in Brussels, who leads the think tank Indo-Pacific program. Under the deal, New Delhi will lower tariff on European cars and wine, while the EU signaled it would assist Indian companies with decarbonization, so that's the answer to CBAM, and negotiate duty-free quotas for Indian steel. Economists at the Kiel Institute estimate that the accord could lift EU exports to India by up to 65% and add more than 0.1% to GDP on both sides. India will gradually slash tariff on European cars, reducing them from 110 to 10% on 250,000 cars every year. A range of European agricultural goods will also see their tariff drop, reassuring the lawmakers and farmers who have staged a fight back against the Mercosur Accord over fears of cheap competition from Latin America. India will lower tariff on wine to between 20 and 30% from 150% now, depending on value. European olive oil will also enter duty-free into India instead of facing a 45% tariff. Today finally found a crazy tech I expected for a year. What do you mean, the trade deal? The stickers issues relate to steel and the new carbon border tax, CBAM. New Delhi, a major steel exporter, wanted to make sure that its metal wouldn't be impacted by the upcoming 50% EU tariff on steel and the carbon levy that just entered into force. In response to those concerns, the EU plans to give India a significant share of the 18.3 million metric tons of steel that can enter duty-free into the bloc. Brussels will renegotiate those quotas in the coming months as is required under global trade rules, therefore India's own share still has to be agreed upon. Germany are so... they were actually left-wing to far left because they are totally people. If I have the person... It's true enough to say... Yeah, you know. If you're going as far as to say that the CDU, so the German right, is a left-wing party, yeah, your point of reference on what is the right wing is pretty fucked up, I would say. Today you got the AfD is left-wing, everyone knows because they think some immigrants can become German. I mean, like, if you start thinking AfD is left-wing, like I'm starting to get scared of where the comments come from. Like AfD is a dangerous pro-immigration party. Nazi third way got. You still have Nazi parties. I thought the Nazi parties were banned, like properly banned in Germany. They don't like. Is it they're getting banned and then they rename themselves? Because I like from what I remember that there was pretty strict laws in Germany like to ban Nazi parties. Although then you also have the constitutional court that prevented that. Yeah, the NPD. Yeah, the courts, the constitutional courts at the NPD was too small to be fully banned. But yeah, if you're down to the point of saying that AfD is a left-wing party, yeah, scary times. MLPD? I never heard of those parties. DKP? Like, yeah, we're really going into like the small parties. Yeah. Alright, let's continue. Ability to sanction a party makes it harder to sanction. I mean, the AfD is like, in how many like lender is the AfD like officially considered an extreme party and a security threat by the intelligence services? Like it's as if like in France you had the French intelligence service that was saying, oh, Rassemblement National is officially an extreme party and something that represents a security danger for the Republic. Like, we're at that point. %40 of viewers that vote AfD on the left. Wow. Yeah, young people, yeah, they tend to vote radical on both sides these days. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we've seen indeed. Yes, I had seen that thing about the former boss of the US of the German. Yeah, that they found their own party and that it collapsed. Yeah, I had seen that indeed. I had seen that because there were like a few scandals as well, like in the on the infiltration of like hardcore far right, like complotist ones within the security services. I do remember like some scandals like a few years back where they dismantled like cells within the German military. I seem to remember something like that. Okay, thanks for passing by, Ripto. Where was I? No, okay, I read that. Okay. There will be, of course, a difference in how you treat this negotiation on application of steel measures between FTAs and non-FTA, FTA free trade agreement, and non-FTA partners. Therefore, I think it was strategic from both sides that we have the agreement now and that India will be treated as an FTA partner. EU Trade Chief Mao Sefcovic told Politico, so you give a preferential treatment then to India because they are a free trade agreement. Domestic service was BFV. Okay, d'accord. Thanks. Where was I? There. On the carbon tax, carbon border tax, so CBAM, a new levy on carbon emission that has irked countries like the US, and Brazil, Brussels will help Indian operators to have a smooth introduction of CBAM with all the technical assistance and all the additional advice we can provide, Sefcovic added, stressing that the Commission would treat all its partners equally. So there's no exemption, that's the main thing that India had to give up, most likely in the negotiation. Indian Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal acknowledged that patience would be needed on steel. We have agreed in good faith to work together towards a very preferential treatment as a free trade agreement partner, Goyal told reporters after the summit talks, saying a satisfactory agreement could take 6 to 8 months to achieve. So then we will have, like, that's like I said, you have the framework and then you will have like side deals on steel, on GIs, on other things that will be concluded to kind of complete the package of the trade agreement. Oh, we're not doing too bad on time, so we can read another one on the deal, which this one detailing a bit more like who gets what exactly in terms of sectors and everything. So there we'll go into the meat of it. But yeah, clearly, like as the article said, the key thing that unlocked everything was Trump's tariff and of course, the opposition between India and China. India and China are big competitors, regional competitors, So seeing China tightening the screws on critical raw materials and everything pushed New Delhi, India to make compromises with the EU and conclude a deal and find new friends. So EU-India free trade deal explain why it matters for growth and jobs. The pact/its tariff opens up services and agriculture and marks the largest trade agreement either side has ever signed. The EU and India sealed a landmark free trade agreement, bringing two of the world's largest economies closer together at a time when global trade is increasingly shaped by geopolitical tensions, which you could say is also the case in this one because it's the fear of Trump and China that has fueled the conclusion of the negotiation on this deal. Covering nearly 2 billion people and almost a quarter of global economic output, the deal marks the biggest bilateral trade pact either side has ever signed. Okay, so it's the same quote that we read before. EU and India make history. We have created a free trade zone of 2 billion people, with both sides set to gain economically, said Ursula von der Leyen. She added that rules-based cooperation still delivers great outcome, which is a jab sent to the US, saying, okay, the US, they want to leave the rule-based order, like the traditional post-World War II international system behind. We, the EU, we are still committed to that system. We still want to negotiate with other countries, find agreement with these countries, and you see, we managed to conclude deals we're still open for business, so people gather around. We can do our own club of cool kids without the US, which is in line with the discourse that the Commission has taken since last year. So at the core of the agreement is a sweeping reduction in tariff. India will eliminate all reduced duties on 96.6% of EU good exports, while the EU will liberalize 99.95% of its tariff lines on goods imported from India over 7 years. For European exporters, the Commission estimates savings of up to €4 billion per year in customs duties, money that can be reinvested into production, wages, or lower consumer prices. Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič said the agreement shows that win-win trade deal is real, stressing that the immediate priority is to ensure firms reap tangible benefits as quickly as possible. Sorry, I have a notification. There we go. There we go. India's average industrial tariff exceeds 60%, among the highest of any major economy. Their reduction is therefore particularly significant for Europe's capital-intensive industry, which have long faced steep barriers to the Indian market. In 2024, EU exports to India totaled roughly €75 billion, driven by €48.8 billion in goods and a further €26 billion in services. Machinery and electrical equipment are by far the EU's largest export category to India, worth $16.3 billion in 2024. These products currently face tariff of up to 44%, which will be mostly eliminated under the agreement over a period of 5 to 10 years. Aircraft and spacecraft exports totaled $6.4 billion last year. Existing duties of up to 11% will be reduced to zero, with tariff elimination phased over a period of up to 10 years. When you reduce tariff in general with all trade deals, it's always over a period of time. It's not like we are 150% today and the next day, the day of the entry into force, it suddenly drops to zero. You always do that progressively over time. So the reduction will be over 5 to 10 years, because then it's to cushion the shock for the companies that were protected by the tariff, so that they can adapt to the new competition. So that's why you have always like this the phasing in on long periods, because it serves as a safety period for companies to adapt to that. EU chemicals export to India, valued to $3.2 billion in 2024, are currently subject to a tariff of 22%. They will scrap the duty at the time of entry into force. Pharmaceutical products amount to €1 billion and currently face a tariff of 11%. One of the most striking changes concern motor vehicles. Indian tariff will fall from 110% to as low as 10%, albeit subject to quota, so the 250,000 vehicles that we saw in the previous articles, while car parts will eventually become tariff-free. For European manufacturers, this opens access to the world's fastest growing large automotive market. The potential gains extend beyond exports. According to the EU trade with India already supports around 800,000 jobs across the bloc, with the agreement expected to reinforce employment in manufacturing, services, and supply chains as trade volume expand. So there you have the chart of all the exports, what the EU is selling to the EU, to India, sorry. Agriculture has long been the most sensitive area in EU-India negotiations. Currently, Indian tariff on agri-food products average 36% and can reach 150%, effectively shutting out many European exports. In 2024, EU agri-food exports to India were worth just 1.3 billion, only 0.6% of the EU global agri-food trade, due in large part to prohibitive tariff. Amid the trade agreement, Europe's high-value agri-food exports, from olive oil to wine to confectionery, are set to gain meaningful access to India's rapidly expanding middle-class consumer markets. Wine exports, which are currently facing a tariff of 150%, will see duties cut sharply to between 20 and 30%. Spirits, subject to tariff of up to 150%, will benefit from a substantial reduction to a flat 40%, while beer tariff will fall from 110 to 50% under the agreement. Olive oil, as we saw, will see dramatic changes, with tariff to 45% being fully eliminated, opening the door for wider consumption beyond premium niche. Literally this quote repeats that. Crucially, sensitive agriculture sectors such as beef, chicken, rice, and sugar remains excluded from liberalization, protecting European farmers. They'll still find a way to a reason to complain, but you don't want to reproduce the Mercosur dramas. As in any trade agreements, our high food safety standards are fully maintained. The safety of EU consumers is non-negotiable, Hansen added. So that means that all the products that are forbidden for consumption in the EU will remain forbidden after the trade deal, which is a classic stance within EU trade deals. So here we have a table with the current and future tariff. Processed food, so yeah. Still, I mean, that's a good reduction. I mean, when you go from 50% to 0%, that's not nothing. It's not nothing, like even more like when you go from 150% to 20%, like. Then the question is there a market on the other side? Like if you have if you drop 150% to 20%, but that basically no one in India is buying your product, yeah, okay, that's the gain is limited. But if you have a middle class that is developing in India that can now afford wine, spirits, or whatever because the tariffs are collapsing, not uninteresting. So what are the goods that the EU buys from India? According to the ITC trade map data, the EU imported a total of 89.8 billion euros worth of goods. So 90 billion, and we were exporting how much? How much were we exporting? Scrolling. 75. Wait. Oh, wow. Because that's 90 billion just in goods. And we are exporting to India. Shit, I lost it again. Like 45 billion? Ah, I lost it, chat. Help me. Yeah, there. like 50 billion in goods. So that means that we were in trade deficit compared to India. So that means that we are importing more from India that we're selling to India. But even the higher classes in India are millions of... Yeah, of course, like when you have a 1 point... Like just a scale. Like imagine you can put 3 times the population of the EU in India. Like even a 5% increase in sales to India just because of the sheer size of the market, it's a net positive. Of course, like within the 1.5 billion people, you have many people. I mean, India is a very poor country, like has extreme poverty within the country, and we know that, and they are not going to buy European products. Let's be real, but still, like it's still going to be millions and millions of people who suddenly become accessible to European exports. Okay, so Indians sell much more to the EU than the reverse. Which makes sense because the EU is historically an open market, while India is a very closed market historically, so that kind of makes sense as well. So the largest single import category was electrical machinery and equipment, which include a sound and television recording device, with imports value at 13 billion euro. This is followed by organic chemicals at 12 billion euro. Import of machinery and mechanical appliances, including nuclear reactors and boilers, total 8.6 billion. Iron and steel shipment amount to 6 billion. Pharmaceutical products account to 4.7 billion. Oh, I'm surprised. I would have thought that there would be more pharmaceutical product because India is a giant in pharmaceutical products, like the generics, like the industry of the generics is very big in India, so I was expecting more from. I mean, to be fair, the EU is also a big pharmaceutical producer, so at the same time. But yeah, I was expecting more from pharma on the Indian side. Textile also remains significant, with import of articles of apparel and clothing accessory reaching 3.6 billion. Beyond tariff cuts on goods, the EU-India FTA marks a substantial breakthrough in the liberalization of services, a traditionally protected domain in India's trade policy. India's services commitment under the FTA are the most ambitious it has ever undertaken, surpassing the concession granted to partners such as the UK and Australia. European companies will gain more predictable access to key sectors including financial services, maritime transport, and professional services, with clearer rules on licensing, local presence, senior management, and board requirements. According to the Commission, total EU service export to India reached 26 billion in 2024, a figure expected to grow substantially under the new legal and market access condition introduced by the FTA. For SMEs, the agreement is designed to address structural disadvantages that often prevent smaller firms from benefiting from trade deals. A dedicated SME chapter aims to ensure that smaller firms can translate the agreement into real commercial opportunities. Both sides will set up a SME contact point with a shared digital platform. Okay, so information exchange. What happens next? The FTA will now go through legal revisions and translation into all official EU languages. The Commission will then submit it to the Council and European Parliament for approval. In parallel, India must ratify the deal domestically. The question being, on the EU side, is it a mixed agreement or is it a pure trade agreement? I mean, the way they describe it, it seems to be like a pure trade agreement, so you don't need approval from the member state, from national parliaments, and it's really just council and parliament, which of course facilitates things, because the difference being one case you just need approval from 2 institutions, in the other you need approval from 50 plus institutions. So slight difference, let's say it like that. So once ratified by both sides, the agreement will enter into force with tariff reduction and regulatory provisions gradually phasing in over a period of up to 10 years. For Europe, the agreement is not only about exports, but also about economic resilience. With India's economy growing at over 6% annually and a young population of 1.45 billion, the agreement provides the EU with a strategic partner in a region increasingly seen as central to global economic power. The Commission expects the deal to double EU good exports to India by 2032, supporting jobs across manufacturing, agriculture, and services. In an era of fragmented trade and rising protectionism, the EU-India FTA stands out as a long-term bet on openness and on growth driven by deeper economic ties between the two of the world's largest democracies. Do we have questions on the EU-India deals before we move on to the drama of Mark Rutte in the European Parliament? I give you a second while I sip some tea. Up. Alright. I don't see any questions, so let's move on. Alright. Back in Brussels. So we had yesterday Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, who was in the European Parliament to have a chat with MEPs to discuss the situation on Greenland, EU defense and everything. And Mark Rutte pissed off quite a few people. As français peut-être, yeah. Il y a du français ici. So yeah. Mark Rutte pissed off quite a few people since he said that, well, the EU cannot defend itself and that you still need to rely on the US, which made people quite unhappy, and France even made a remark afterwards saying, yeah, screw you, Mark, we can see we can still defend ourselves without the US. Je reconnais l'accent franglais. My accent is not that... I mean, there are worse French accent. I have a French accent, but it's not the worst. I will defend that to... that's a hill I'm willing to die on. My French accent is not the worst. But I mean, if you want to see me without the French accent, it's on Fridays. On Friday, it's a news review in French, but today's in English. I like my comments on Rutte. On X, Rutte represents NATO, not Europe. Yeah. I mean, you have a bit of a tough war between the EU and NATO on defense, and also Rutte has his own role in strategy in his relationship with Trump. So there is a logic in Rutte saying what he said. We may disagree with it, but there is a logic in it. So let's read about what he said, why he pissed off people, and the reactions. So Europe can't defend itself without the US, NATO's Rutte warns. The EU should stop dreaming of creating a European pillar for NATO and continue to build ties with the US despite Trump, the Alliance Secretary General said. Bear in mind that NATO is independent from the EU, it's a much wider participation. You have, 32, 33 members inside NATO these days, including the US, which is like the biggest military partner within the alliance, and arguably the main pillar of the whole organization. So Rutte has also institutionally an interest in saying, okay, don't kick out the US yet. They're kind of important inside the whole thing. Mark Rutte being like a former Dutch prime minister, he became NATO Secretary General when like 20... When was Rutte? When did Rutte become 2022? Attends. Rutte State Secretary General NATO. When was it? Shut up, you. Oh, 2024. I thought it was older than that. So it's not even 2 years. I mean, to be fair, like, it's barely been a year since Trump has been in power. Like, it feels like 5 already. So yeah, times gets a bit screwed up there. Okay, so Rutte has been Secretary General of NATO for less than 2 years. Oula, qu'est-ce que tu me fais? Don't panic. Okay. The US will defend us from the US in Greenland. Europe is incapable of defending itself without America, NATO chief Mark Rutte said on Monday, speaking just days after Donald Trump's repeated threat to seize Greenland pushed the alliance on the brink of collapse. I think it felt like 5 years for him to... Yeah, I think for many of us it felt like 5 years. I think we have this kind of this commonality for everyone. It's been already too long. And like when you think about everything that has happened in just 1 month, like we're not even the end of January, guys. Like we still have 11 months to go. Where was I? Yeah. If anyone thinks here that the European Union or Europe as a whole can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming, he told lawmakers on the European Parliament Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee. You can't. A European pillar of NATO is a bit of an empty word, Rutte said, arguing a European army would create a lot of duplication with the alliance. Moreover, Russian President Vladimir Putin will love it, he added. So, saying, yeah, okay, you throw big words around European army and everything, but A, duplication, because, and that's where you have the institutional turf war between the EU and NATO. Historically, NATO handles European security. EU does civilian stuff. It doesn't deal with military. Doesn't deal with the EU security. And increasingly, notably because since Trump, the EU say, yeah, we should work more on defense. Maybe the US is not so reliable anymore. And so NATO doesn't look kindly to the EU, kind of starting to plant the tent in its backyard. So of course there's a word, say, okay, that's not your job, get the fuck off. Get the fuck out, that's my turf, keep on doing your civilian stuff. There's also a vague question about duplication, like what's the point of doing twice the same thing, like the EU would be doing something that NATO is already doing. So there's also a practical question of how to most efficiently use resources, deploy resources, and not divide NATO. And Rutte's argument is, oh yeah, NATO is something that we know works. If you want to create something at EU level, in a field that you have no experience in, you're just going to mess up things, and the one that's going to benefit is Putin, the guy that you want to protect yourself from in the first place. So kind of saying, yeah, leave NATO, do its thing on security. We've been doing that for the better part of 70 plus years. And leave, the Americans are a bit problematic, but yeah, we'll manage that. To you need NATO, you should stay in it. You're crazy to want your in. I mean, we can discuss that after. Like the question, the point is, Rutte has kind of a point to a certain extent, and also it plays into the Rutte strategy. And Rutte, when you read that, you say, oh yeah, Rutte is just a guy where he's just a Trump fanboy and everything. He's just doing whatever, please Trump. He's an adversary. Blah blah blah. Rutte is not an adversary to the EU. Like Rutte is, on the contrary, someone who has helped the EU when dealing with Trump. his job is to be kind of in French we would say faillot, the kid that goes to that becomes teacher's pet, that goes to Trump to say, oh, it's great what you're doing, we love what you're doing, I love what you're doing, etc. But you know, it's great what you're doing, I love what you're doing, but you know, maybe you should maybe redirect a little bit, like just a tiny bit, yeah, like this. Oh, perfect. Oh, that's awesome what you're doing, etc. So Trump, like he's kind of sweet talking Trump to kind of manage him a little bit, and Rutte has been coordinating with the Europeans on Ukraine, on Greenland and everything. So it's not like he's not JD Vance, he's not Rubio, he's not like part of the MAGA establishment that hates the EU and wants to focus over. Like Rutte is fundamentally, I mean, he's European, he's fundamentally on our side. He shares a lot of the strategic thinking of the European, but his job is to suck up to Trump to kind of redirect him. And also, he's also defending a bit his own job because, he's the Secretary General of NATO. NATO's biggest member is the US, so of course, he can't let people say, yeah, well, you know, fuck the Americans, we can do without them. Of course, he's going to defend a bit one of his members. Your job, but for Eastern European states, is popular. I mean, again, that's where you see the issues. No, it's not the issues. Like the specificities of and the different perspective even within the EU. If you are an Eastern European, you definitely do not have the same approach to NATO and the relationship with the US than if you're French or Spanish. Like, it's two different worlds. Like, entirely two different worlds. Like, for the Polish, for the Balts, like, yeah, NATO is a big fucking deal for them. Yes, the US is a big fucking deal for them because they're literally neighbors with countries that have erased them from history, from the map, literally erased them from the map in the past. Having the backing of the world's most powerful military is kind of a big deal for them. For Eastern Europeans, like, the US and NATO is what put an end to the Cold War. That was the deterrent against Russia, and so of course they want the thing that stopped Russia to be in the backyard. So that's why they're naturally more keen on NATO and the US, because from their perspective it's vital. While on the French or Spanish side, far less. Like, we don't have an existential threat on our borders. In the case of the French, we have a very complicated relationship with the US. So the logic are becoming very different. And yeah, as you said, for most of the 21st century, the US are better aligned for. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's like for the French, we love saying to everyone, we were right all along, and we are the biggest army, we are the biggest military in Europe. Yeah, okay, if you want, but who is guaranteeing the actual security of Eastern Europe? It's the US. The Americans, for all their flaws, they still have 80 to 100,000 soldiers based on European territory to serve as a direct deterrent. How many French? Would the French replace American troops? And also, when you look at the debates within when you look at French politics, there's a good chunk of the French political spectrum that would happily sell Eastern Europe to Russia for a bit of tranquility. So yeah, if you're an Eastern European, you're sure, the French are very good to make big speeches. I would rather not rely on them for my defense because they would happily sell me out to Russia, and while they talk a big game, they're not going to put 100,000 soldiers to protect me. I mean, there's also the question of the post-Cold War. That's a different thing. I mean, there we should not, like, let's say, kind of rewrite history as well. And there were reasons for the reshaping of the militaries and everything post-Cold War. But yeah. No, I don't understand he's doing his job, but the way he does it, I don't like it. At least he could sometimes just shut up and keep a low profile and not being Trump's carpet all the time. I mean, again, that's his role. That's his role. And the thing is, I mean, again, I'm not in Rutte's head, but probably the strategy is to, by taking a position that is arguably pretty extreme, saying yeah, the Europeans can't do shit on their own, it's all thanks to the US, he can use that to his advantage when talking to Trump. Trump, who is notoriously not a big fan of Europe, and could very easily abandon Europe if he could. So Rutte hyping up the Americans and say, yeah, you know, the Europeans can't replace the Americans, etc. Then he can go see Trump, say, oh, look, you see, I hyped you up like crazy in the parliament. I shut them down on saying, oh, Europe can replace the Americans, etc. So, but you know, because they are so weak, even if they invest 5% of their GDP in defense, etc., you can't abandon them. Like, they're poor Europeans. You have to stay there. You can't abandon them. So then that feeds into the strategy of keeping Trump under control. While if he was saying, yeah, I don't give a shit if sure Europeans go your way without the US, Trump could take it the wrong way and say, okay, fine, you think you can do without the US? Well, fuck you, I'm out of here. And then the Europeans are in big shit because they can't handle their defense as of today. And that's where Rutte is right on substance. Also, everything Western Europe tried in regards to if it was Russia was bad, but if you look where we landed, it is understandable if Easterners tell us we don't. I mean, there's clearly a bit of a humility pill that Western Europeans had to take post 2022, because suddenly, well, turns out that Eastern Europe understood Russia better than we did. And indeed, they can tell us we told you so. So yeah, for sure, there's a case for Western Europe to take some lessons from that, and draw back a bit on the arrogance. I mean, for the French, like, remember when Chirac told to the Polish back in 2003 when the Polish decided to support the US intervention in Iraq. Chirac, who was the French president at the time, said to the Polish, you missed a good occasion to shut up. Kind of saying, yeah, you know, you're the new kid on the block, let the big boys handle diplomacy because it's too complicated for you. Which of course wasn't taken too well in Poland, and didn't help with the credibility of France, etc. It feeds on many things, and also the resentment that part of Eastern Europe has towards the West, also because the East has a complex of inferiority inherited from the Cold War. There's many things at play there, but. And at the same time, Eastern Europe should also understand, okay, we can't rely anymore on the US, we need to move on, so you need to overcome some of your fears and also do stuff. So, like, for instance, part of Western Europe is saying, so you also have a middle ground to reach on both sides. Huh? Where was I? Okay, so I read this part. Okay. So Rutte went on to insist that the EU allows Ukraine to spend part. Ah oui, to insist that the EU allows Ukraine to spend part of the bloc's upcoming 90 billion euro loan to Kiev on weapons from the United States, despite a push by some member countries like France to spend the money on the bloc's own military supply. So there it's a reference to the so the EU is taking a loan to finance Ukraine for up to 90 billion euro because in April Ukraine is running out of money, and of course a good chunk of that 90 billion, I think it's 60 billion, goes to Ukrainian defense. Kind of makes sense, and there is a principle that that money by default should be spent on European weapons. Like, it's EU money, so yeah, part of that money should go to European industry, but there are exceptions, like if Ukraine absolutely needs some equipment that has no equivalent in the EU, then they can buy outside of the EU, for instance, in the US. And France had an extreme position saying that no, there should be absolutely no exception. Every single euro of the 90 billion must be spent on European equipment. Nothing must go to the US, which kind of an extreme position. And Rutte is saying, yeah, no, don't put conditions that only even a significant part of the stuff must be bought from European company. You should also buy from the US. So there, it's Rutte defending the US and the US industry. Also, again, to be able to say to Trump, oh, look, I defended the interest of your country, you know. Oh, look, there, you could help me out on this. To be fair, it's a bit easy to say that prospectively. Poland invested more in its military quite recently, so I could say the same about them. They didn't took Russia as a serious threat. Poland didn't take Russia as a serious threat. No, sorry. Poland is arguably a country that always took Russia seriously. Now, Poland indeed increased its the size of its army, but again, it's not like Poland did not have anything before. Like, Poland always had kind of a decent army and everything. Now, to the point that Poland has now a bigger army than France. Like, the French army is like 200,000 soldiers. Poland now it's 215,000. So, in terms of pure personnel, army size, now Poland has a bigger army than France. Oh, then equipment capabilities is another thing, of course, but like, you can't say that Poland was not doing anything and was sleeping on its was sleeping on the side. Like, Poland is definitely the wrong example for that. France is not threatened at its border. It matters. Yeah, of course, it matters. France has also a specific position because France has always seen itself as, it is a middle power, and it has always insisted on keeping military capabilities, capacity to project its army. So France is also like an anomaly in Western Europe because it has always wanted to keep the status of a military power, even more so than the UK, for instance. Like, the UK has military capabilities, they have nukes and everything, but they were never at the same level as the French because the French actively kept capacities to project themselves and were also actively participating in conflict, in missions all around the world. So France is also a kind of an anomaly in there. Like for France, the revolution, the military revolution for us, it's more like a change of doctrine. In the sense, and it's not anybody's fault there, in the sense that post, particularly 9/11, post Cold War and post 9/11, we didn't deem we didn't deem useful to maintain large conventional army, because we thought our large conventional conflicts are not the future. Now it's gonna be we need small forces that need to go far. So you maintain smaller armies, well equipped, able to go far, but you don't need conventional armies because it's no longer going to be tank battles. And now with Ukraine, we rediscovered that heavy conventional warfare was back on the menu, and that it's also back on the European continent. So you need to regrow the size of your army. You need to be able to regrow your production capacity to be able to sustain lengthy, heavy conflict and everything. So it's more like a change of doctrine and a change in the typology of war that the EU and also the rest of the European armies need to face. Just be clear, I don't say that France does everything good and it is a bit to look at. Just I don't like the Eastern discourse. There is quite an easy one when they could be playing as much as the Westerners for their lack of action. Yelling there's a threat does not do much. I mean, yeah, you could put blames on put blames on both sides. Huh? Not everyone was perfect in this thing, huh? But how can I say it? The additional issue is, many of you on this chat are French. You know it as well as me. We are known for a certain tendency to go "I told you so" in a certain manner. Some might call it arrogance. That can then be counterproductive because you basically take the head of the people you're supposed to convince, you put them in their own shit, say, look, I was right, and now you have to absolutely do everything that I said. So France does not necessarily know how to be humble in victory. Let's put it like that. And also has a tendency to make big speeches that, in terms of doctrine, may be right. Then when it comes to acting on the speeches, that becomes a bit more complicated. And typically, and that's one of the reasons why there are tensions between France and Poland. Like again, they are both the incarnation of two different type of approach on that. France takes the question of defense, EU defense, more as a industrial policy, while Poland, and so it's we need to boost our own industry. While Poland is more of an operational thing. We have an enemy at the gates. We need to fortify with everything we've got right now. Macron talks about European sovereignty after 2022 and then focus 80% of the armed forces defending 3 isles in the Indian Ocean. I mean, he did recommit some forces in Romania. He did send some people in I mean, again, it's in Romania, it's like 1,500 soldiers, so it's not like it's not huge. And also in the Isles, there are stuff happening also in the Indian Ocean with the aggressivity of China, etc. So there's also reasons why, and like France also has an argument in there in the sense that yes, there is a threat in Eastern Europe, but there are also European countries that can handle directly that threat on the Eastern Front. In the Indian Ocean, there are also some threats, strategic threats. There's not that many countries outside of France that have capabilities to secure these parts of de facto European territory. So yes, France then focuses on the part that no one else can cover. Like putting soldiers on the Eastern Front, yeah, the Polish can do it, the German can do it, the Italians can do it, anyone can do it. Sending troops and fleets in the Indian Ocean, there's far less countries that have that sort of capabilities. So there are also like the question of where are your forces most useful? That's also a dimension of the equation that must be considered. All right, let's continue. Wait. I moved the thing. Okay, so even in the Cold War, the defense of the European continent was just the German army. Just wanted to give you an example of comment. The defense of the European continent was the German army. I mean, it was the US. Like during the Cold War, it was it was the US bases. I mean, the Germans also had an army and everything, but they were kind of also of the front line with Eastern Germany. But like the defense of the European continent during the Cold War it's the US. Just like now, it's the US as things stand currently. All right, let's continue. So that I said. The comments form part of a broader pattern in which Rutte has insisted that Europe has to keep channels open to the US and that the US presence remains loyal to the alliance. Washington still has a total commitment to the alliance collective defense, he said. The US needs NATO. He also credited Trump for getting all NATO countries to boost their defense spending to at least 2% of GDP as of last year. Do you really think that Spain and Italy and Belgium and Canada would have decided to move from 1.5 to 2% without Trump? Nowhere, Rutte said, which is true as well. Without the US, defending Europe would cost a fortune, he added. Again, like the thing is, the way Rutte said things, he said that as a pure troll. Like he's trolling the MEPs, saying like things in a way that is only going to piss off the MEPs. That's for sure. Like he's behaving like an absolute troll because acting as like a troll will play well with Trump and everything. But on substance, to describe the situation as it is right now, he is not wrong. He is not wrong that, as of today, for sure. Yeah, I haven't managed to mimic perfectly the for sure of Macron. I need to train. But as things stand currently, Rutte is right. Like the EU is not able to defend itself without the US. And whatever has happened in terms of increasing defense capabilities of the EU, it's because of Trump pressure. Like when he says, without Trump, we would still be struggling to even reach 1.5%. He's right. He is right. But that's where I disagree with him, is that the way he says it, so he's being kind of a troll, but he's taking the current situation as of today and kind of acting as if, okay, that's the situation today, and it's going to be like this, and it has to stay like this until the end of time. There's nothing to be done, don't try even to do anything. Which is where the disagreement, the strategic disagreement, is occurring, because while it's true to say that the US, for now and probably in the near future, is and will remain the pillar, the key element of the European defense, in the medium to long term, that can be a different story. Some would say that should and that even must be a different story, but there is the possibility to change that situation. But Rutte, of course, as he needs to defend NATO, as he needs to defend the US, cannot say, yeah, of course, you could go your own way and kind of cut off the US from European defense. So without the US defending Europe would cost a fortune, he added. For Europe, if you really want to go it alone, forget that you can ever get there with 5%, Rutte said, referencing a pledge by NATO allies to ramp up their defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035. It will be 10%, he argued, and cost billions and billions of euros to replace America's nuclear deterrent. Which again, is not false. On that, he is right that if you want to replace fully the US, that's gonna cost a pretty penny. That European economies currently don't have. The Secretary General reassurances that Trump is committed to NATO follow weeks of threats from the US president suggesting he could take Greenland by force and that he would levy fresh tariffs against European countries for deploying limited troops to the self-ruling Danish territory. Last week, Trump finally ruled out using force and U-turned on the tariff after setting out a deal he said would give the US more control over the giant Arctic island, although both Denmark and Greenland insist they will not compromise on sovereignty. Rutte, whom Trump credited with helping broker the alleged agreement, admitted he had no mandate to negotiate on behalf of Denmark. He also dismissed the idea that the talks on Greenland were linked to ensuring the US security guarantees for Ukraine. So there, again, Rutte is being teacher's pet. At the same time, is managing to push or accompany Trump in de-escalating things. It's not just thanks to Rutte that Trump dropped the military threats on Greenland. A major reason is probably domestic politics. Probably Trump got the message that within the US, the Congress, the Republicans will not back him if he was to invade militarily Greenland. So he was incentivized also by domestic politics to drop out. But Rutte is accompanying that and providing a way out for him by saying, okay, we can make a deal, you can win some stuff, etc., etc. So again, Rutte, by being teacher's pet, helps to an extent the Europeans. Like there is coordination on many things between Rutte and the European leaders. They're both. Everyone is agreeing that Trump needs to be kept under control. And I wanted to say something else, but I forgot. So probably it wasn't that important. And again, yeah, see. We know that Trump said, yeah, okay, I made a deal with Rutte, so it's fine. We'll do something on Greenland. Nobody knows what that deal is. Like, it's not really a deal, a proper deal. Like, Rutte probably threw some ideas that Trump jumped on to claim that he has a win, but then the actual negotiation needs to be made by Denmark and Greenland. So the only thing that we know is that Trump walked back on the threat of trade war and military invasion of Greenland. A so-called deal gives him an excuse. What that deal is or could be, we don't know. And probably Rutte himself doesn't really know. He probably threw something and Trump just took it and used that as kind of an excuse for de-escalation, to claim, oh, I got what I wanted, so I don't have a need now to threaten the others of invasion and everything. The EU should also not exclude US weapon firms from the 90. Okay, so that's something that we already discussed. The loan package will make a massive difference to Ukraine. I know what I wanted to say. Sorry. There. When you say, oh, you know, there's no link between discussions on Greenland and and Ukraine. Like, both things are dealt separately. Yeah, sure. Like, we know perfectly that the US is using Ukraine as leverage against the Europeans. I mean, that's literally what they did on the trade war between the EU and the US back in August. I have no doubt, even for a split second, that Trump will use that again in any negotiations with the Europeans on Greenland. So yeah, press X to doubt. Although, of course, Rutte can't say anything else. Like, Rutte has to say, yeah, of course, the things are completely disconnected. Ukraine is not going to be used as leverage and blackmail against the Europeans, even if he himself knows that it's not the case. Like, it's just pretend. So yeah, the loan package will make a massive difference to Ukraine's security, Rutte told lawmakers. But here I would really strongly urge you to ensure flexibility in how these funds can be spent and not to be overly restrictive with the by EU caveat. So there, that's the opposition to the French approach. Under the proposal published this month, the Commission said 2/3 of that cash, so 60 billion euro, would go towards Ukraine military expenditures, with EU arms maker prioritized as suppliers. As a result, Kyiv can only tap the loan to buy non-European weapons if it has an urgent need for a product and where no alternative exists, and if it has obtained approval from the EU executive and the bloc's capitals. That came after France, backed by Greece and Cyprus, lobbied to bar non-EU countries like the US from winning contracts financed with that money, a move opposed by countries like Germany and the Netherlands. With France pushing an extreme position where there was supposed to be absolutely zero exception. Rutte warned that restricting Kyiv's ability to make spending decisions would hamper its military efforts, which to an extent is true because there are some capabilities, for instance on anti-air weapons, where the Europeans simply do not have or not enough production capacities to sustain what Ukraine would need. So of course, buying from non-European suppliers is important for Ukrainian defense. Hence, the exception. Europe is now building its defense industry, but it cannot at the moment provide nearly enough of what Ukraine needs to defend itself today, he said. So as you take this loan forward, please, I encourage you to keep Ukraine's needs first in focus. The Parliament last week agreed to fast-track the loan, designed to last until 2027, while EU capitals are in talks to broker a compromise on the legal proposal. I'm gonna read quickly on the backlash. So he said that he trolled the MEPs, he did not make a lot of friends on this occasion, and France notably got very pissed off, to say the least. Oh, sorry, I'm just checking. Okay, that I don't care. Alright, so Rutte faces backlash for telling Europeans to keep on dreaming about independence from US security. So Mark Rutte is under fire for his dismissive remarks about the idea of European separation from Washington's protection. You can't, we can't, he said. So he's facing backlash after he said the EU should keep on dreaming about becoming independent from the US, its largest military ally, in matters related to security and defense. His comments came on the heels of US President Donald Trump's attempt to seize Greenland, an unprecedented dispute that brought the nearly 80 years old transatlantic alliance onto the brink of collapse. The tension was diffused by a deal on Arctic security brokered by Rutte. When President Trump is doing good stuff, I will praise him and I don't mind publishing text messages, Rutte told members of the European Parliament on Monday afternoon, referring to Trump's leaking of the two men's personal communication where Rutte had said, oh yes, I will hype up in Davos, I love what you're doing, in Davos I will hype up how you contributed to make the situation better, cool, also on Greenland we need to talk, so yeah, the Rutte strategy of being the hype man of Trump to then redirect him towards some things that is more in the interest of the EU and NATO. If anyone thinks here again that the EU, or Europe as a whole, can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming. You can't, we can't, we need each other, okay? So that... we can skip, we read it under the previous article. You'd have to build up your own nuclear capabilities that cost billions and billions of euros, he said. In that scenario, you would lose the ultimate guarantor of our freedom, which is the US nuclear umbrella, so good luck. Rutte's intervention at the parliament quickly attracted interest on social media, where clips were widely shared by users and picked over by analysts, which again, he can show to Trump, say, hey, look, I defended you from the Europeans who said that they want to go alone against the US. I said that the US is important, you see, stay committed. In response, Paul Appignot, the chief spokesperson of the Commission, said the political focus should remain on making the EU increasingly resilient and increasingly independent on various fronts, including security and defense, which is, again, kind of a recognition that the EU today cannot deal without the US. That's simply not possible. And doing that transition, even if you want to do it, that takes time. And again, that's a change in itself. There I'm completely inventing the figures, but you don't do that in 6 months. You need 10 years to do that sort of transition. So you can't afford to provoke Trump that would make him drop in 6 months NATO, and then suddenly you have nothing, and you have to rush something that you can't rush. And at the same time, you don't also have 10 years because all intelligence services show that Russia is preparing for 2030 to a potential action. That doesn't mean that there's going to be an invasion or whatever, but they are getting ready to potentially do something. So you don't have 10 years, you have 5. And how do you do that transition in 5 years without losing in the meantime the one country that ensures that you can defend yourself in the meantime? So it's a highly complicated equation. Let's say it like that. And also, like, beyond the big speeches, and we fall back to what we were saying before, it's very nice to say to make speeches, then you have to actually act. Saying we have to become militarily independent from the US, easier said than done. You need to not only increase the size of your armies, your investment. I mean, everything that Rutte said, you need to invest heavily in your defense. So a bigger army, bigger production capacities, more equipment, etc., etc. But also politically, you need to make sure that your public opinions are ready, that they are ready to accept. Okay, if I'm French, I'm Spanish. If something happens in the Baltic states, fuck it, we ball. And we go hard. Because they are allies and we need to go. Which is currently not really the case. Like I said before, you take France, Spain, Italy. In terms of public opinion and political debates, a good part of them would be quite happy to sell Eastern Europe to Russia, if that ensures pseudo tranquility and social benefits. So all the work that needs to be done to make we are independent from the US in terms of security, For now, we're not there. Which again feeds into what Rutte is saying, that you can't deal at the moment without the US. So we have a positive story to tell in terms of how we've been able to reduce our dependence on imports of fossil fuels from Russia, although you're switching that dependency to the US to a certain extent. Pino said on Tuesday afternoon. Such dependencies are seen also in other areas, on defense, on critical raw materials. We are engaged in doing all that needs to be done to reduce the dependence, to reduce the exposure. Pino referred to the speech delivered by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen last week, calling for greater European independence in response to growing geopolitical instability and confrontation. Von der Leyen also teased an upcoming security strategy with special emphasis on the hotly contested Arctic region. We're really putting together a number of measures with one aim, Pino went on, to ensure that we can achieve such a gradual independence. However, the fierce backlash against Rutte came from France. Who else would do it? A vocal advocate of the concept of strategic autonomy and the Made in Europe preference for public tenders. No, dear Mark Rutte, Europeans can and must take charge of their own security. Even the US agrees, which is true. The US have been the one saying for the past 10 years, Europeans, you need to sort your shit out and become and ensure more your own defense. It is the European pillar of NATO, said French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot on his X account. Benjamin Haddad, France's Deputy Minister for European Affairs, echoed the message, pointing to the fact that Europe, not the US, is the largest donor to Ukraine. We have to go much further on defense. We have no other choice. We see a world that is becoming more brutal, more violent. We see threats coming from American allies against the sovereignty of Denmark, Haddad said in an interview with DW. It is now time to take matters into our own hands and defend our security. But the truth is, Europeans are not weak. We have the tools, we have the instruments. Nathalie Loiseau, a prominent French MEP who attended the committee meeting at which Rutte spoke, delivered a bluntest assessment. It was a disgraceful moment, Loiseau wrote on her social media. Rutte thinks that being rude to Europeans will please Trump. We don't need a Trump zealot. NATO needs to be rebalanced between the US and European efforts. Meanwhile, Charles Michel, the former president of the European Council, mocked the NATO chief for having called Trump daddy during last year's war between Israel and Iran. Trump later used the term to defend his own foreign policy decision. Dear Mark Rutte, so Rutte is said to have said that Trump was Europe's daddy, and that the EU leader were calling Trump daddy when talking about defense, which Trump used to his advantage, and then he denied, said, "Yeah, no, I didn't say that he was our daddy." So even himself said, "Yeah, no, maybe I went too far on that one." So, dear Mark Rutte, you're wrong. Europe will defend itself, and Donald Trump is not my daddy, Michel said. Europe's future requires vision, courage, and leadership, not resignation, submission, and fatalism. Any questions on that before we move on to our final topic, which is going to be about industry and how the EU is kind of copy-pasting some Chinese past policies on that. Up. New. Okay, good. That I can close. All right, giving you a second. All right, I don't see any questions, so let's switch. All right, final topic and final article for today. So the EU's industrial policy goes full China. So you know that for the past few years, there's been a renewed talk of the European industrial policy. The idea that we need to rebuild our own industry, we need to defend our industry against international competition, and how do we do that? You have the fight between competition policy and industrial policy, which in the previous mandate was kind of incarnated by the opposition between Thierry Breton, the French commissioner, and Mariette Vestager, the Danish commissioner to competition. Now you have all the debates around the European preferences in some public tender markets, and then also looking to China on how they gave an advantage to their own industry in the past to then become what they are today. So while in the past the EU was the big champion of, okay, we need free market, free competition and everything, you can't have intervention, etc. Now you can have the reverse kind of policy where intervention in the market to boost the industry is deemed as important because of global competition and also need to reboost the European economy, strategic autonomy and everything. So the EU's industrial policy goes full China. Brussels risks scaring off investors with new red tape and Beijing-style requirements for foreign companies. China's controversial policy of forced joint ventures is making a comeback, this time as a cornerstone of the European Commission's master plan for reviving Europe's industrial might. Beijing went from a poor economy in the 1970s to a superpower by requiring foreign automakers and other companies to enter into partnership with Chinese companies, giving them critical know-how and creating many of the supply chains that power its economy today. So basically, if you wanted to go on the Chinese market, China would say, okay, and still the case today, you want to be on the Chinese market, well then, you need to do a partnership. In the sense that you're not going to have just your company, like let's say Volkswagen. Volkswagen wants to enter the Chinese market. You're not going to be just Volkswagen. You're going to be Volkswagen plus another Chinese company, and you're going to do 50-50. So it's going to be a 50-50 Volkswagen and Chinese company partnership, and then through that partnership, you'll be able to sell your cars in China. What's the interest for China is you build up the expertise of your industry, because then the other are forced to team up with a local company that then will learn from their foreign competitors, and then in time potentially being able to go it alone. While on the side of the foreigner, like the big carrot is, okay, you get access to the big Chinese market. So that is still today one of the key things. If you want to do something in China, you have to go through joint partnership where it's going to be 50% Chinese, 50% whatever your company is. Once a taboo spurned by European policymakers, because free competition, you cannot force a company to share its know-how with a local company. Everyone should be able to do his own thing. The idea of imitating China's success in growing into an industrial juggernaut is winning increasing acceptance as a catch-up strategy. And also because since we have a global economy that is less and less based on the rule-based order, so respecting World Trade Organization rules, that you have much more protectionism, etc. So it's more and more everyone for themselves. The Europeans, okay, are seeing what's going on and say, okay, we need to also adapt because the others, well, they don't play by the same rules as us anymore, and so we need to protect ourselves. Now it's being written into regulations with the Industrial Accelerator Act, a plan spearheaded by Industry Commissioner Stéphane Séjourné, mandating that foreign companies team up with domestic firms if they want to get access to the European market. But lawyers and analysts say making the policy a reality will be challenging and opens Europe to charges of hypocrisy, because Europe as being the advocate, okay, we need to have free competition, we need to have to respect the rule-based order, WTO, etc., etc. And so if you start using the same tools as China, of course, double discourse. It goes against all the efforts Europe has made in the past in keeping this market open, and just from a legal standpoint, it's very dubious, said Nicolas Poitier, a researcher at the think tank Bruegel. The IAA, so the Industrial Accelerator Act, aims to boost industrial production to at least 20% of the EU gross added value by 2030, from 14.3% in 2020, according to a leaked draft obtained by Politico. Séjourné, who has an executive vice president ranks as the top French official in the Commission, plans to get there by reverse engineering joint ventures, instituting strict foreign direct investment requirements, and copying another Chinese policy around manufacturing clusters. It's a stark shift from decades of touting open markets and decrying the forced technology transfers its companies had to comply with to get access to China's burgeoning market. Yeah, when you were doing the joint venture, it's not only you had to build together with a local company your factory, you had to transfer tech. So the tech that was exclusive to Volkswagen, you had to share it with the Chinese competitor. Which of course leads in the long term to other problems, because then they can use your technology against you. Shortly after the draft leaked, the Commission delayed its publication for a second time to February 25th, meaning parts could still significantly change. And that's the classic, something leaks, you check what are the reactions, and depending on the reaction, you adjust the final text, and you say, oh, but that was always the plan. Séjourné's cabinet has said that it postponed the presentation in order to maintain the very high level of ambition that it is discussed internally. Under the IAA, in its current draft form, foreign investment over 100 million euro in emerging key strategic sectors would trigger mandatory screening from authorities. Foreign investors would also be banned from owning more than a 49% stake in any EU companies operating in the same industries. So again, the idea, some sectors that you deem very strategic, not only you ask for a ticket of entry to access the EU market, but you also prevent fully foreign companies to take a stake and kind of conquering that market and killing off the European competition. Some provisions, such as a cap of 49% of foreign investment, sounds like a replication of what China or Gulf states imposed years ago, commenting Falctioning, a partner at law firms Hogan Lovells who specialize in FDI screening. FDI is a foreign direct investment. And there's already a law in place today on FDI, which says that in certain sectors, member state, I'm not an expert, so I'm saying that as from memory. In some sectors, member state can check and authorize whether a foreign company is allowed to invest in a European company, and they could potentially say no because it's a sensitive sector, because it's a problematic. The investment comes from a problematic country. There's a risk of technology transfer, etc., etc. So you're like in the defensive part of industrial policy. While the official annex defining what classifies as an emerging sector is still under lock and key at the Commission, the draft indicates it will cover energy-intensive sectors, net zero technologies like battery and solar panels, and the automotive sectors. The classics. Along with joint ventures, companies would be required to share know-how to the benefits of the union target, the draft says, and intellectual property rights would remain in the hands of European companies. It's very funny, like like I'm reading that and I'm thinking, like the discussions, like 10 years ago. Oh, on a un raid. Merci Arte, raid from Arte. Welcome. Oh, we're in English today. Salut Mez. Welcome. We are reading about the EU industrial policy. Oui, désolé, on est en anglais aujourd'hui. J'espère que vous aviez un bon, vous avez eu un bon stream. Papillon lumière. Oh putain, j'ai la ref en plus. Oh. Papillon lumière. Comment elle s'appelait la... Sorry, we're talking about French or Belgian songs. Sorry about that. So, catch up. I'm catching you up on what we're talking about. We're reading an article about the industrial strategy of the EU, which is replicating... Cindy Sanders, merci. Which is replicating what China was doing. Alors, Guten Tag, mon allemand est trop rouillé pour ça, désolé. L'accent français pas du tout. Je maintiens que j'ai pas l'accent français le plus dégueulasse. Je le maintiens, ça, je mourrais pour ça. So yeah, how the EU is now replicating some Chinese strategies to protect its industry in critical sectors like critical raw materials, car industry and everything, going against everything that the EU had done in the past in terms of free competition, that sort of thing. And I was just before the raid, I was going to say something and I forgot. Yeah, no, I will. Yeah, I know what I was saying. I like reading that new strategy on the EU kind of replicating the Chinese strategy on industry is very funny to me because I remember the political discourse when I was in the parliament like 10 years ago, and like it's a 180. Like the Vincent in the chat would remember that we were colleagues, like saying something like what we're reading right now would have been like heretical, like beyond heretical. Bonsoir. Désolé, on est en anglais ce soir. That would have been absolutely heretical. Like someone would have said stuff that is now in the draft of the commission. Like you would have been branded a terrible communist and banned from the parliament within seconds. Like even the most pro industrial policy, most protectionist people in the European Parliament will never say things like this. On the contrary, you say, "Yeah, no, that's terrible that China is doing that. We should not be doing the same." Blah 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 blah. So that's very funny. To see how things have changed over the course of 10 years, like and that applies to many things. Huh? Like we see that, and it's also ironic because in the French context, like everybody knows, like for the French, everybody knows that whenever there's a discussion on the EU, you have it's done against the French interest. It's in the interest of Germany, machin. Us French, we're always on the losing side of EU debates, etc. Which is extremely funny to me because when you look at the evolution of the political discourse of the EU over the past 10 years, is the exact opposite. Like EU politics has never been more French than today. Like tons of concepts that France was pushing on its own like 10, 15, 20 years ago, and that were considered, it's too extreme, nobody wants to see that, etc., etc. Now is the bread and butter of the Commission. Like strategic autonomy, it was something that France was pushing since the mid-90s. Nobody was supporting that until 10 years ago. Well, there was a Macron effect, there was a Trump effect, so you have a combination of things that allowed that change. But now, strategic autonomy is literally in every single text of the Commission. Like, any text that comes out of the Commission is justified under strategic autonomy. And now it's even going further on independence and all that. Never been that French, profoundly broken, divided and blanked the biggest issues since bad. I'm talking political concepts. I mean, there are other things we imported from France. Recently, the parliament has suddenly has a fascination, a passion for motions of censure. That's a recent trend as well, like imported from France. Not the best trend, if you ask me, but yeah. How does this draft compare to a requirement on companies wanting to implement? That's exactly the thing. Like, this draft is basically doing what the Chinese were doing. So China from the 70s is saying, you want to enter the Chinese market, you have to do a joint venture with a Chinese company and transfer technology to the Chinese company. The EU was always against that, etc., because it was to the benefit of a Chinese company more than to the European. It was against fair competition and all that. The draft is now basically saying the same should happen in the EU. In some sectors. So in some sectors, basically there's a list of sectors that will cover... je fais la merde. That will cover net zero, automotive, battery, solar panels, etc., etc. In those sectors, if you are a non-European company, you can be required to do a joint venture, so you cannot own more than 49% of that project. The technology must remain European. So it's literally Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V on the Chinese policy of the 70s. Because there is overall like a complete change in the philosophy of the EU, the international philosophy, where we go from a world that used to be ruled by what we call the rule-based order, so free competition, WTO rules, all that jazz, to a market and internal environment that is much more protectionist, aggressive, and protectionist and aggressive, and so that forces the EU to kind of change its software to adapt, and also to go towards a return to an industrial policy. Before it was more, you always had tension between competition policy and industrial policy, and historically, competition policy was the one that was having the upper end in the political debates, in the sense that the priority of the EU was to ensure free and fair competition on the market. So you should not have companies that get undue advantages. You should not rig the market to an extent by public intervention. That sort of thing. Because we were in the rule-based order, economies had to be open. That sort of thing. Now we're seeing not necessarily a full reverse, but more and more industrial policy is considered to be equal, if not more important than competition policy. You still have a tension. For instance, the French and the Germans are very much pushing for industrial policy to be superior to competition policy. Smaller countries, not so much. But industrial policy is again considered to be a priority because there is a change in the international environment, much more hardcore competition, and also there's a political pressure to reverse the bad economy that the EU is facing these days. There's also political reasons because the rise of the far right is partly fed by the downgrade of industry throughout Europe. So there's a combination of things that led to industrial policy making kind of a revival in the EU these past few years. And now, literally, the Commission copy-pasting policies that nobody would have ever thought, the EU is going to do that 10 years ago. Alright, I continue. So that I read. So foreign investors should commit to spending at least 1% of the revenue generated by the joint venture on research and development within the EU. So You can't own the full venture, and you have to invest the thing inside EU. Is this a win for the far right? I mean, yes and no. The far right will tell you, oh yeah, that's great because we're giving priority to European companies, and we're giving European workers the priority. So far right will say yes, that is a win. That is a win for us. At the same time, the rise of the of populism in general, far right, but also not only far right. We know that from Trump. We know that from Brexit. We know that from pretty much all the populist movements of the past 15 years. Populism, one of the criteria of the rise of populism is parts of the population, particularly in former industrial centers, that feel left behind. And so, if you manage to fix this by reviving an industrial policy, and so revitalizing sectors, revitalizing geographical regions that were kind of left behind, you kind of reduce the appeal for the far right, because it's the fact that you had an economic downgrade that then were pushing people to become more radical, and so to embrace far right, etc. So if you fix kind of the economy, or fix entre guillemets, then you also, in the medium to long term, reduce potentially the appeal of the far right. So you could argue in the short term, the far right will say, oh, that's exactly what we've been saying for years. But we would even want to go even further because it should not even be 50%, it should be more, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, you potentially could be countering one factor that helped populist movements, far right but not only, to rise up in the first place. If you implement, it's not really that. It's not the fact that you implement the far right ideas that you don't need to elect far right parties. Is that you remove a factor that led people to become radical. The rise of populism in Europe is fed in Europe and beyond. Let's say the populism in the past 15 to 20 years. Like I said, you find kind of the same mechanics in the US, in the UK, in France, etc., etc. You have two different kind of things. One, you have the feeling of people who are being left behind. Typically in areas where that used to be industrial regions that got closed down because companies closed down in Europe and left to China or whatever. And so these people felt left behind. They feel like to be the losers of globalization. And so they feel everybody's saying, oh yeah, we are, the world is better because of globalization, but actually I'm becoming a loser of it. And so that builds frustration. I don't have a job. I don't have, what used to be the pride of my region, the pride, the identifier of my region is lost. And so you build frustration. First factor. Economy is a strong factor, a strong, let's say, kickstarter to radicalization, a process of radicalization. Second point is that you create a kind of, and I always forget the exact word, when you have you're dissociating, like there is a dissociation between what people see themselves, or how they see what they see they should deserve, and what they see in reality. I give you an example. Just to conclude on the first point, on the economic part, like the demonstration of this, you look at where populist, far right but not only, are rising. You always have the same patterns. Marine Le Pen, the new stronghold of the revitalization of RN, the north. Former mining areas that got closed down, former industrial region that got closed down. They started to vote far right because they felt they were losers. In the US, the Rust Belt, all the former industrial region where you had steel plants, car industry, etc., that got closed down, they decided to vote Trump. In the UK, you have the so-called Red Wall that were formerly bastions of the left industrial region that then switched to Farage, to Brexiters. And so, same in Germany, Eastern Europe, or there the question is less economic. It's also linked to the former Eastern Germany. But yeah, you have this pattern of deindustrialization, economic loss that kickstarts a process of radicalization, and then also feeds into my second point, which is disassociation. In a sense, take the Americans. Everybody knows the American dream. The social contract in the US is, if you work hard enough, the American dream says you will reap the benefit of it. And you will become successful in everything because that's the American dream. You work hard enough, you get what you deserve. That's kind of the idea. So you have this idea that is sold to you. And then you dissociate because you see what you're being sold, what you think you deserve, because you're working hard, you're doing everything that you should be doing, etc. And then you see, or at least you perceive, a different reality where actually you don't get that American dream. You're being told that you will benefit from this, from that if you work hard, but you see that actually you're worse off than your parents, than other people, etc. You perceive that, then the other thing, it's the migrants that are taking the benefits and everything. So you kind of dissociate between what you think you are being owed and what you perceive of reality. And the fact that you can't reconcile this, what you think you are owed and this reality, feeds even further this radicalization, on which populism is going to feed. That's the recipe of populism over the past 20 years. And so the point in the industrial policy is not to say, yes, you're taking the ideas of the far right and so it's great. It's just that if you revitalize industrial regions, you counter the very first argument, the fact that the economic loss of certain regions, then you remove part of the radicalization process. Because suddenly these people are not left as, I have absolutely nothing left to lose, so everything can burn. So it's not exactly, I'm doing what the far right is doing, so it's great. It's just you removing one of the things that fed the far right. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Okay, good. Moving on. Where was I? Okay. I missed the... Finally, we'll have to source 50% of their manufacturing products in the bloc. So that creates a huge credibility problem, argues Poitier. We have for years and years and years been complaining about the Chinese imposing joint ventures requirements, he said. Now we basically go back and say, well, actually, we want to do the same thing. As China, and again, the EU historically has made its own strategy. We are a free and open economy, etc., etc. Because that was the rule-based order, WTO, and everything. And now, since there is a change of environment, we switch back. As China opened its economy to foreign investment in the 1980s, its policymakers instituted forced joint ventures that saw European companies like Volkswagen partner up with then little-known automaker SAIC. The scheme created the backbone of Beijing FDI strategy, FDI foreign direct investment strategy. Western governments balked but ultimately acquiesced in the hope that China would democratize as it became wealthier. That's the classic change through trade, the German strategy of change through trade, by increasing your, that was the belief, by increasing your commercial link with a non-democratic country, ultimately you will force democratization because they will be more and more exposed to Western ID, democratic ID, etc., etc. The population will become richer, and so by becoming richer, they will have more demands in terms of democracy, etc. And so you kind of force a process of democratization in these countries. That was the theory. That didn't really work out, as we saw in China and in Russia. On the contrary, that kind of backfired, because what happened instead is that then, in the case of Germany, they built up dependencies on these countries on gas for Russia and on the automobile market, the export market for China. So it kind of backfired on them. For European companies, the corporate mashup was a small price to pay for access to a huge potential market. It paid off partly for German automakers. At the height of the car market in 2017, nearly half of Volkswagen global sales went to China. But that exposure has become Europe's Achilles heel. We allowed dependency to be created because we thought that we would always have access to Chinese-made input and there would never be trade weaponization, said Agatha Kratz, a partner at research firm Rhodium Group. We self-willingly gave China more say and more space in our supply chains. That's where we have a key concept, trade weaponization, which is the new thing. No, China has become very good at using that by weaponizing the trade dependency of some member states. So when the EU is thinking, okay, let's do something on China, then China says to Germany, hey, you kind of depend a lot on access to our markets. That would be a shame if you lost all that, because you're taking sanctions against us because we are doing things that are not exactly legal when it comes to electric cars and everything, which leads Germany to then push back on taking actions against China because they need to protect the market access to China, on which their companies now rely significantly. And in other field, China now is aggressively weaponizing critical raw materials. So you have critical raw materials are a category of resources that are very important to build solar panels, batteries, missiles, tanks, microchips, that sort of thing. And as it happens, depending on the type of critical raw material, China controls up to 98% of the global market. Either on extraction, so taking off the earth the material, or, more importantly, on refinement. So once you take the stuff out of the earth, you can't just put it directly in the machine to build a solar panel. You need to refine it, and so you need a specific industry, and China has specialized into building this refinement industry. Meaning that up to 98% of the critical raw material have to go to China to be refined and then be resold to be used in solar panels, wind turbine, and everything. And China now is weaponizing that system by saying, I'm putting exportation quota on those critical raw material. So that, for instance, Europeans, you want to reinvest in your defense? Oh, that's too bad, because you don't have any more access to, or you have far less access to part of the resources that are necessary to build missiles. Same for the US. You want to become carbon free, you need to do solar panels? Well, that's too bad. You can't have access to the stuff, or you have to buy Chinese solar panels. And so now you have a race around critical raw materials, basically to escape that dependency from China. That's one of the reasons why the US is going hard after Greenland. That's why they made a deal with Ukraine. That's why the EU is making a deal with Mercosur. That's why they're doing a deal with Australia, because they're trying to reduce their dependency to find alternative markets. The EU is trying to build new production capacity within the EU to, again, try to reduce their dependency to China, because China now is doing trade weaponization. They're using dependencies that we have de facto to its political advantage. So beyond questions around the prudence of stealing Beijing's strategy in a tough spat between DG Gros, so DG Gros is the Ministry of Economy, I would say like that. Yeah, DG Gros and the Commission's Trade Department, which oversees existing foreign direct investment screening rules. The EU institutions struck a political agreement in December to revamp the regulation, which requires member countries to screen investment in military equipment, technologies like AI and semiconductor. EU capitals fought hard against the Commission proposal to give up what has traditionally been a national competence. This is where I expect this act also to fail. This will be very controversial in the Council, said Poitier. Yeah, it's like the way they describe the draft. It seems very French-inspired, which makes sense because Stéphane Séjourné is the lead on that. I'm pretty sure that other countries might have a few notes and remarks on that text. And at the end of the day, if some of these conditions survive, they will be clearly challenged in the international area, which, to an extent, you could even say who gives a shit because WTO is paralyzed. So, in a way, who gives a shit? Which, again, builds on the double discourse because the EU is defending WTO. Well, that's all other kind of one. Sweden has come out against the leaked proposal, arguing that the FDI screening tool and other existing mechanisms aiming for protection of strategic sectors in the EU are already in place, according to the Confederation of Swedish Enterprises. Assuming the Commission convinces enough EU capitals to back the proposal, the IAA could still fail to successfully mimic China's strategy, which worked because of the size of the Chinese market provided such huge economic upside. It's because you wanted to have access to a market of 1 billion people, you were ready to sacrifice the fact that you had access to exclusive technology and everything. Could the EU have a similar effect? Debatable. The EU is still a very important market for many companies in the world, so you could still make an argument. But it's not untapped 1 billion market like China was back in the day. You can do that if you are a super attractive geographic area, but if you have a structural problem with growth, you should think twice about adding red tape, said Andreas van Bonin, a competition partner at law firms Freshfield in Brussels. Some sectors do provide enough of an economic benefit, such as cars, where Chinese automakers face oversupply at home and need to find growth opportunities abroad. But to make such strict conditions worth the downside of giving away a technological upper end, the EU would also need stricter import restrictions, said Kratz. The Commission has tried to get tough on China through actions like imposing duties of up to 35% on made-in-China electric vehicles in 2024. Basically what happened, that was a French request, China is doing a lot of illegal subsidies, so they're giving money to industry so that they can artificially reduce the price of their product and compete with other products, which gives them an unfair advantage. And so the EU imposed a tax on the companies that were identified as benefiting from unfair, illegal subsidies, to up to 35% to correct that, and so that you can have again a form of fair competition. Sure, the EU is a small market, but also the EU doesn't want or can decide to seize everything or close the market in one snap of a finger like China can. Yeah, okay. The perks of being, I mean, okay, China, because it's China, has all the tools at its disposal. The EU also has the advantage of certainty. Like you have legal certainty, you know that there are rules, and so that is an incentive. The mere fact that you don't have the risk of a government snapping its finger and says, yeah, now that stuff is mine, it is an incentive in itself. Because you're secured in the fact, okay, if I invest in that space, I'm not going to lose everything. So the fact that we are a democratic rule-based system presents economic advantage because it gives certainty, and companies always want certainty. What do you doesn't have in number? We can have the security of his. Oh, yeah, exactly. That's the point. Yeah. Where was I? Ah, yeah. So that has, however, failed to shut out Chinese electric vehicles, as the manufacturers can still make a profit in Europe, even with the extra duties. We're not putting enough constraints on the table to force them to do so. The European market is still extremely open, and I don't see why the Chinese company would be willing to invest under such strict conditions in the current environment, said Kratz. Do we have any question on that article or industrial policy, or on any other topic? Because that was the final article for the day, so we can kind of cover anything else. Otherwise, I will do the conclusion. I will do the conclusion. Up. Go full screen. And a good timing because I'm finishing my tea. Up. For those who were on Arte, like, what was the topic for of the stream, like that you left to generously join me? I didn't look at the program for the week on Arte, so I don't know what you're up to. Up. Up. I'm doing this. All right. Okay. In the meantime, if I don't see any question, then conclude. Conclusion. Conclusion. Next time I see you, Friday. Important pour ceux d'Arte. We were in English today. On Friday, I'm in French, so that makes it easier for you guys to follow and participate. So Friday at 5, that's the stream in French. News review as usual. Otherwise, thanks again to Arte for the raid. Thanks for those who followed. I hope that you enjoyed. You won't be there on Friday. Oh well. There's the replay. There will be the replay. So I'm putting the replay now on YouTube. I'm being good, so you can catch up easily. I mean, you could always catch up on Twitch anyway, but yeah. So if you like what you saw, do follow. If you have a Prime lying around, do toss a coin to your streamer. That's always appreciated. You can follow me on my other social media. Tac. Boom. You have the Discord, you have the Twitter, you have everything. I'm Mori. Ah, you saw me on my... yeah, welcome. Oula, shit, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. And yeah, next time I see you, so Friday in French for the news review. And I was going to say something interesting that I forgot. So that's probably not that important. And yeah, I will see you then next week or on Friday for the other on Friday. And yeah, I wish you all a good evening. I will finally be able to have dinner. So bon appétit à moi. And yeah, have a good one, guys. Bye bye. See you next time.